What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo, and welcome back to the top 100 Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time. In this episode, we're going to be covering numbers 70 through 61, and if you guys missed the last episode, I definitely recommend checking that out. I'll have a link somewhere on the video and in the description as well. Just to catch you guys up, though, in case you aren't familiar with what we're doing, we're covering all of the best cards from right when Yu-Gi-Oh began all the way up until now, looking at them in terms of how good they were back in their prime, as well as if they were to come back into the game today. It's completely subjective, but it's a ton of fun. So before we get into it, big shout outs to all of my patrons and YouTube channel members for all of their continued support. And if you're interested in supporting the channel yourself, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with number 70, we actually had a little bit of a tie. It's between Solemn Strike and Solemn Warning. Now, both of these cards are incredibly powerful counter traps in their own right, Solemn Warning being the first to come out, I believe, back in Duelist Revolution. Now, when this card came out, what's funny is that it actually didn't make that large of an impact, but then people realized how powerful this card was, and then it just became an absolute staple, soon finding its way onto the limited list. Now, Solemn Warning being able to negate a summon or when a monster would basically be special summoned in a lot of different instances is so powerful because you'll be able to just completely lock out stuff out of the extra deck. You can stop cards like Soul Charge, which are just some of the craziest and hardest cards to stop in the game. Solemn Warning does a lot of really good things, but then later on in Breakers of Shadow, we got Solemn Strike, and Solemn Strike was even good in its own right because it was able to stop inherent summons of monsters, so again, anything coming out of the extra deck or something that wasn't special summoned off of an effect, but then you were also able to negate monster effects, and that extended all the way even into hand traps, which is why Solemn Strike saw so much play, because being able to stop some of the most just powerful cards in the game that activated in the hand really gave Solemn Strike a place in several different formats, and at the low cost of 1,500 life points, 2,000 for Solemn Warning, you were able to activate multiple in a single turn, and that's what makes these cards so powerful. They had to make their way on this list in some form or another. Now that brings us on to number 69. We've got Pantheism of the Monarchs. Now in my opinion, Pantheism of the Monarchs is honestly one of the best draw spells we've ever had in this game. So basically you have to discard a Monarch spell or trap to draw 2, so you're kind of breaking even on that exchange. However, not only are you setting up your graveyard with the Monarch spell and trap cards, but you also then have the ability to banish Pantheism to be able to add pretty much any Monarch spell or trap card to your hand. And the other thing is too, the discard to draw 2 effect wasn't once per turn, meaning you could completely and utterly abuse this effect. And basically with the ability of the searching, where you're kind of able to manipulate what cards you get added, since your opponent has to pick one of them out of 3, you just pick 3 copies of the same card, they have to give you one of them anyway, so you're basically getting what you want more often than not. Pantheism of the Monarchs was basically just one of the reasons why Monarchs was such a powerful deck, because it really lacked consistency, but Pantheism gave it that consistency that the deck really needed, and when it got hit on the ban list, the deck really did suffer, but it just goes to show that having an incredibly powerful draw spell really can help a deck out. Honestly, if this was in any other archetype, it would be equally as broken, but pretty much just being relegated to Monarchs just put Monarchs at the top tier status, and that's why it made it on the list at number 69. That brings us on, however, to number 68. And for number 68, I've got a good fusion spell that a lot of people are really polarized about, Super Polymerization. Now, Super Polymerization just came off the list for us here in the TCG. I know the OCG's had it for a while now, and I think they might even have it at 2, but anytime there is a card in Yu-Gi-Oh that says your opponent cannot respond to this card with effects or activations, it's just utterly broken. Like Super Poly being able to fuse and your opponent not being able to respond, and also being able to use your opponent's monsters as fusion material, and it's a quick play spell. This card is just utterly ridiculous. This card essentially defined a format, because back when Shaddolls were at full power, being able to fuse with your opponent's monsters was just absolutely absurd, not to mention you're going into something like a Construct or a Winda, so the amount of value you're generating off a single card, yeah, you have to discard a card, but who cares? You're just getting so much value out of it as a disruptor, and just being able to just propel the game forward in your favor. Super Poly is just one of those cards I was really happy was banned. I was on the side of really not liking it back because I hate any card in this game that says your opponent can't play or respond. I mean, it is an interactive card game, but that's neither here nor there. A lot of people really do love this card, and it even sees play today in decks like Thunder Dragons or being used to outstuff even like Extra Links. So the fact that, you know, it can actually be used in a lot of other more flexible ways, even outside of fusion-based archetypes, I think it's really cool, and that's why it was deserving of that spot on this list. That brings us on to number 67, Elemental Hero Stratos. Stratos is one of the craziest cards ever printed in this game. It was one of the fastest cards to hit the ban list. It was actually emergency banned. If you ever heard of the deck Airblade Turbo, yeah, Stratos is pretty much the reason for that deck's existence, and if you actually played for that like very short time that that deck was around, yeah, it was not fun. Stratos just pretty much changed the game entirely when it came out, and I'm really glad it did get that emergency banning because it definitely was deserving of it. But Stratos is a very powerful card. It's basically due in part to the fact that it doesn't have any once per turn clauses, which is what makes it so good, but you have a card that is not only able to search any card in its given archetype, it's got an 1800 body, it doesn't care how it's summoned, and it also has a secondary effect that if you have multiple monsters of that archetype on the field, you're able to pop spell and traps that your opponent controls, giving it just another layer of just flexibility that makes the card even more powerful than it probably should be. Now, we just did get it off the TCG Forbidden and Limited list, and honestly, it hasn't really been doing a whole lot. It's seen some play and maybe some hero variants that are taking advantage of Goki, but other than that, I think it's perfectly fine that it came off the list, and a lot of people are happy, especially the hero players. I think it's really cool to see that hero players can actually play the deck with their most likely favorite card of all time. That is going to bring us, however, on to number 66. For number 66, we've got Tour Guide from the Underworld. Man, when this card came out, this card was a game changer. You have to remember, this card was essentially one of the very first cards to come out during the Xyz era, and having a card that could just special summon a monster directly out of your deck, and you were able to just go into an automatic rank 3, and this is also back when Sangan was still legal, so keep that in mind. It was just absurd. Tour Guide from the Underworld was a very expensive card when it first came out, and honestly, it's had a lasting legacy even up to this point. I mean, Burning Abyss being an entire deck of fiends basically gave Tour Guide a natural fit as the game progressed, and it's been crazy because back at the day, there was the point where Tour Guide was still at 3 in Burning Abyss, basically making it one of the strongest starter cards in the deck. It's now only at 1, but the thing is, it's basically the deck's power play, and every time you see a Tour Guide, you just know things are about to get rough. I mean, we saw this card back in Dino Rabbit format. Like, this card has had so many appearances in so many different formats, and it's a card that a lot of people really like. It's not overpowered, but it's very fair, but also just incredibly strong at the same time. So definitely justified of making a spot on the list. That is, however, going to bring us on to number 65. And for number 65, we already mentioned it a little bit earlier in the video. In my opinion, one of the strongest fusion monsters ever to be printed in this game's history, El Shaddoll Construct. Now, Construct just has so many powerful abilities, it is hard to just sum them all up. I mean, you have a 2800 body that can basically just destroy any monster that was special summoned because of its built-in effect, and not to mention when it hits the field, you're able to just dump a Shaddoll monster for free, which is so good because considering all the Shaddolls trigger when they hit the graveyard, you're going to be generating some sort of advantage. And oh, guess what? If El Shaddoll Construct goes to the graveyard, you're able to recur a Shaddoll fusion spell, which basically means it replaces itself. So basically on summon, it's an automatic +1. If it dies, it pretty much is a +2, and then all the fusion monster you use to summon the Shaddoll Construct are also going to trigger, basically mitigating any of the cost you use to summon this card in the first place. El Shaddoll Construct was one of the most feared cards back in the Duelist Alliance format because it was just so powerful, so oppressive, the fact that it was just very difficult to get rid of, and even if you did, your opponent was just going to get resources back anyway, so it ultimately didn't matter most of the time. El Shaddoll Construct is one of my favorite cards of all time. I really wish it would come off the list because I don't think it would make that that large of an impact, but the impact that this card has had on the game is definitely lasting in a lot of people's memories from the Duelist Alliance format. That's going to bring us on, though, to number 64. And for number 64, we've got not one, but an entire archetype of cards, because it was really hard to find a place to put all of these, but I pretty much gave them Necros of Valkyrus as their main leading card, because I think Necros of Valkyrus is, in my opinion, the best out of all of them, but I'm going to be kind of covering Necros in general. Necros was arguably one of the top 10 decks or archetypes of all time, because it was just incredibly powerful, incredibly consistent, and really was just an ultimate toolbox of different cards. I mean, Necros of Valkyrus was basically a Pot of Greed plus a Battle Fader in a 700 attack body. Might have been 29, actually. I forget. It's been quite some time. You also have Unicorn, which is able to negate monster effects and just do all these other things. You've got stuff like Brio, which could bounce cards and also search the deck. You had Clausulus, which could search your ritual spells. And then you had Necros of Trishula, which was basically like a ritual version of the Synchro Trishula, which basically defined the entire format because people had to play around the fact that Necros of Trishula existed, so you'd see everyone just setting their entire hand just so they didn't get trished. Anytime there's a card that defines a format and impacts it in that way that everyone has to play around it, that's how you know these cards are insanely good. And again, I just like Valkyrus the best because having that Pot of Greed effect and having the ability to just immediately end the battle phase made it such a force to be reckoned with, because even if you thought they had the OTK, if they had the Valkyrus, guess what? They're going to live another turn, and with that deck, that was enough to take advantage of the game. So one of the greatest archetypes to ever be made, and very, very deserving of the spot on this list. That does bring us, however, on to number 63. And for number 63, I have Evil Swarm Exciton Knight. This is probably one of the craziest Xyz monsters ever printed. It's an entire board wipe, assuming you have less cards than your opponent, and that's what's crazy about it. It's a card that kind of rewards you for losing, but it's a card that pretty much implemented a comeback mechanic so that if you're playing a deck entirely comprised of level 4 monsters, you just overlay 2 for Exciton, nuke the entire board, and then you're back in control of that game. But what's also nice about it is you could do it not only during your main phase, but also your opponent's battle phase, and it was also a quick effect, so you could also use it in response to your opponent's card effects. So just an insanely, insanely powerful card. We actually just got it recently off the ban list, and it's really cool to see that. A lot of people are very happy because there are some times where we wish we had more comeback mechanics in the game. I'm a little bit hit or miss on it, but I still love the card, the design, and being able to play with it and wipe your opponent's board is a lot of fun. That is going to bring us on to number 62, though, and for number 62, we have probably, in my opinion, the strongest field spell ever printed in this game, Spiral Resort. Now, here's the argument I'm going to make for this card. I know I'm a little bit biased when it comes to Spiral, but just hear me out. Spiral Resort is not once per turn. You get to search any in-archetype card with it pretty much every single time you activate it, or any turn thereafter. It's not just when you first play it. The fact that when it was back at 3, you could activate all copies in addition to having 3 copies of Terraforming, so it's like you had 6 copies available. It protects all of your monsters in the archetype from being targeted by your opponent's card effects, and since targeting, especially in the form of disruption, is a very, very powerful tool to pretty much just ward off any of your opponent's disruptors, targeting is very common when it comes to that, so basically just locking your opponent out from being able to stop you in any shape or form is just nuts. And you have to shuffle a card back into your deck at the end phase, but honestly, who cares? Sometimes that would actually be a boon, because then whatever card you shuffle back, you can just search with Spiral Resort again on the next turn. There's really no other card like Spiral Resort, and frankly, there's a reason why this card is limited. When Spiral Resort got limited, Spiral was nowhere near as powerful as it was back in the day, and it's just, in my view, one of the strongest, if not the strongest field spell to ever be printed, just because there's really no downside. It's free, it generates so much advantage, and with the built-in protection, there is no field spell like it out there. Now, wrapping up this video, we're bringing you number 61, and I figure if we're talking about cards that target or have protection from being targeted, this was a very good transition. So for number 61, we have Magispector Unicorn Kirin. Oh my god, if you guys played back when Magispector Kirin was at 3, I am so sorry, because this card was absurdly broken. Kirin being able to bounce cards back to your opponent's hand, and it was not once per turn, so if you had multiple copies, you could do multiple bounces, and it could not be targeted, and it could not be destroyed by card effects, just like every other Magispector card is able to do. This card was so oppressive, not to mention in combination with other decks outside of Magispector, like when we got to Metal Foes. I mean, it just got ridiculous. Kieran in multiples was so oppressive, and I am so happy that this card is gone. It made it almost impossible to play because it's not like you can even remove the card and try to progress your own game state. The fact that it had these built-in immunities pretty much mean it was resilient to almost everything in the format at the time, and then being able to just bounce anything back, they would just kill you the next turn, and it wasn't a really good time. But that just goes to show that this card, even though it's a very cute looking card, it instilled tons of fear into the format, and I think a lot of people are really happy that Kieran is gone. So guys, that's it for this video. If you thought this list was crazy, just wait, because we still have several more videos to go, and the cards are only going to get crazier. So guys, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video entertaining, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.